Special meeting today. Today's session is an opportunity for the council members and staff to have conversations about issues that are coming up. We cannot take a vote on any issue. And you're up.
Thank you, Mayor Barrett and council members. We have one item on our study session agenda this evening, and that's an item titled Palm Canyon Planned Area Development Amendment Static Billboards. What the underlying issue here is, and I know the council is well aware of this issue, this was a parcel of land that used to be in the city of Peoria. In some boundary cleanup some years ago, was ceded to become a part of the city of Glendale, and there have recently been proposals within the city of Glendale for large billboards on this parcel, and that was not in keeping with our understanding during the time of the transfer. For a brief presentation tonight, we have Chris Hawkes, our Planning Community Development Director, and John Schell, our Intergovernmental Affairs Director, who have both been active in this issue, as, of course, Councilmember John Edwards, whose area is adjacent to this, and John's leadership has been instrumental in this issue thus far as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris. Oh, I'm turning it over to John. I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it needs to be a green light. There you go.
There we go. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So with that introduction, the issue is for us fairly straightforward. This is the proposal that we have in front of us is a proposal to erect two very large 85-foot billboards in between two neighborhoods. On the one side, on the west, is a Peoria neighborhood, and on the east side is a Glendale neighborhood. And the location is at the northwest corner of basically the northwest corner of Loop 101 and Belt Road. And, sometimes you have issues that come in front of you where, there are divisions in the community about how people feel about things. Well, we don't have that issue here. Our neighbors, the residents in Councilman Edwards' district are overwhelmingly opposed to the application that's in place right now within the city of Glendale, as are the residents who live on the Glendale side of this border. So, the conflict here is between the residents of both cities and a business that is seeking to realize a revenue opportunity, essentially. So, it makes it an interesting issue, but it's very uncomplicated as far as our view of this issue is concerned. And this originally started as an application for a digital billboard in the same location. And when that application came forward earlier this year, that, as the city manager pointed out, that was inconsistent with what our understanding would be for development at that location. Originally, there was a low-rise office complex that was planned for that by the city of Glendale, which was the basis of our de-annexation to Glendale for that property. Once we saw that, the city manager, of course, communicated with his counterpart over at Glendale to say, hey, wait a second, we never contemplated this kind of a use, and of course, you can never anticipate any and every potential use that when you pass an ordinance, and yet this was very different than what we had expected. And so we had a number of conversations with our friends in Glendale at the elected level, at the staff level, and not long after that, they withdrew that application, and for a variety of reasons, and that was one of them. Not long after that, then a new application came forward in July of this year. There was a meeting held by the applicant to get feedback from the community. It wasn't advertised, and unfortunately it was at a time when both of our councils were in session. So no one from our councils could be there, but we did attend, staff attended that meeting to hear what the residents had to say. And in spite of the fact that there really wasn't any public awareness made other than just letters to people within a certain radius of the location, still 60 people showed up. There were a lot of people, mostly Glendale residents and a few Peoria residents. And again, there was overwhelming opposition to the application at that time from all the residents. Not a single person stood up in that meeting and said that they were okay with it or supported it. So that was pretty substantial. One of the main concerns cited there, aside from the impact of the community character of their neighborhoods, was the idea that this would lead to a proliferation of billboards in other areas of the 101 where there are other neighborhoods and so forth. So that's a reality. That's something that could happen, and this could be a catalyst for that. So there's a lot of neighbors that are very concerned about that. Following that, there was the first official meeting by the City of Glendale was their work session in September 17th. They had a study session, not specifically on this application, but on the larger issue of the billboards. It appeared to be spurred by this particular application, but there was discussion about whether or not to reopen their ordinance that they had taken 18 months to pass, and that most people, like Chris and others, consider to be a model ordinance. It was very thoughtfully done. But there was discussion at the council, should we revisit that, come up with new definitions, and I think most of us thought that maybe there would be some discussion in the context of that as to whether or not that would help this application move forward easier. But nonetheless, instead of sending it to the Planning Commission for further review and more discussion, the council decided not to forward that and not to reopen the patient and make changes to what they had already done. So that was in September. And so up until this point, there hasn't been official action. Now, there are a couple of meetings coming up, which is why we're here tonight. Glendale Planning Commission is slated to take action on December 5th, or at least to make a recommendation to their council as to whether or not they think this is good for their city. And one thing that I'll point out is that even though the feelings are very strong in this area, particularly among the residents, we have always valued the relationship with Glendale. We haven't even come close to realizing the potential of things that we can do together. So we have been very respectful with the city, and we've worked very well with them so far on this issue. Their mayor, their council members have opened their door. They've been willing to listen. We've had many discussions. The mayor has met with their mayor, and our city managers have discussed this. We've all gotten together at different times and talked about this. The flow of information between Chris and his counterpart has been exceptional. So even though we have an issue with this, we don't have an issue with Glendale. We have an issue with this particular application. We haven't gotten into issues. We understand that the council has not formalized a policy on billboards either, so we haven't gotten into that discussion, other than to say that we would love to work together with them, in a manner that is collaborative and regional on that issue. So the issue before us right now is really one of this particular application as it divides these neighborhoods today. And so with that, I will yield to Chris, who can provide some more details, and of course yield any questions you might have.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you, John. So what I'd like to do make a few short remarks and outline the Becker Board's proposal. I'll also, at a high level, outline some of the technical merits of my opposition letter that we provided the City of Glendale, and then talk to you about the next steps in the process. But I want to echo what John said about our relationship with the Glendale staff. We've got a great relationship with their staff, and I also want to recognize he alluded to the model ordinance. We do consider what Glendale has to be a model ordinance, and I want to recognize the good work that his staff and their leadership have done. I think they have one of the better ordinances in the valley. They have an ordinance that is expansive, that's comprehensive, that protects neighborhoods, and so we want to recognize that effort. And as John mentioned, this is a proposal that negatively affects Peoria residents, and so we believed it was an issue weighing in on it and standing behind Glendale's ordinance, and so that was part of the behind some of the merits in my letter. But just to describe the application, again, this is the site in yellow. This is a 26-acre site. This is a proposal submitted by the Rose Law Group representing Becker Boards, and what they're intending to do is to amend the underlying zoning they have similar zoning like we do, a planned area development where you can introduce new standards. So they're intending to introduce a new allowance to permit 2 static billboard placements. Both would be 672 square feet, where if you ask the industry, that's the industry standard for a billboard. A standard billboard is 14 by 48. These billboards would be 85 feet in height. And again, it's the site is zoned for office use today. And as we mentioned, it's the northwest corner of Loop 101 and Bell Road. It's east of the New River Corridor. And I have to apologize for the next 3 or 4 slides. These all appear washed out. These are exhibits that we have from Rose Law Group. But I think at a high level, I just wanted to represent what the proposal was for. So what this illustrates is the proposed elevation of the signs, again, 85 feet in height, 672 square feet. I'll identify in a subsequent slide where they are intended to be located on the site, but there are two placements. There's a southern or a Bell Road placement and a northern placement, which is the one that's closest to Peoria residents.
Just a question.
Sure.
85 feet, how many stories is
Well, Councilmember Ames, if you consider the typical story to be 10 feet, you're probably talking about 8.5 stories. It's a big sign. So on the right, this is a site plan that illustrates the Palm Canyon Business Park. This was a proposal when we de-annexed the site at one time. This was a proposal for a 2-story office park. It happens to be what the zoning is entitled for, is simply office only. So on the left, I tried to illustrate where those placements are in general relative to areas around it. I'll give you a little more detail on a subsequent slide. This shows the two placements. The southern sign would have 3 sign faces, so you would be able to see it on both directions on the 101 and also eastbound on Bell Road. And then the northern sign has 2 sign faces, so just along the 101. They're about 1,067 feet apart, and just as a mental note, that doesn't meet Glendale's ordinance, which requires 1,760 feet of separation between signs. This is another exhibit to show.
Just a second. Back
Sure.
up.
Do they have 700 more feet available to them to comply with their ordinance? In other
I
words, if they
suppose,
went farther north?
Councilor Carlott, I suppose on that aspect, they certainly could choose to move the sign further north, but it might violate other standards that I'll illuminate. I think they could move the sign north to meet the 1,700 feet.
Okay, and just to clarify, the southern sign has 3 faces.
Correct.
And one of them, you have to be going east in order to
Correct.
see it. So the residences, so it's facing the residential property on the west.
Correct, that's right.
Okay, and the one on the north, why does it just have 2? Is there some?
Well, I think because that's the 2 travel corridors they have, north or southbound on the Loop 101, so those are what they're trying to advertise to.
Okay. Where is the road that goes into Costco? It's called Campobello? Is
Yeah,
that it?
It's, let me pull back a little bit. See, I think I have a better illustration. So if you look at this exhibit, you can see 83rd Avenue. And let's see, so if you look at 83rd and Bell, there's where the Best Buy is, and just north of that, is it Campobello? Maybe that's what the street's called, but that's where the Costco is there. But you can see how 83rd turns to the west and crosses Loop 101.
Yes, I see it. So that's why they're putting it there, because it's at the corner of 83rd and the 101.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay.
Mr.
All right,
Edwards?
thanks.
Second.
Chris, on this slide that you have up right now, by them moving that sign, the proposed, if they had to move it back the distance per their requirement, it would actually put it closer to our residential homes, correct?
I think it would still not meet Glendale's 1,000-foot standard if they moved it north.
What I'm trying to get at is the further they push it north, the actual closer it gets to our residents. Is that correct?
Well, that may be, I'm not sure. I mean, the site seems to go to the northeast at an angle. It's hard to say, but I don't think it would meet the 1,000-foot separation that they require.
Okay.
So will they have to amend their ordinance or make an exception?
Well, in this case, they're intending to amend the underlying zoning, but in my letter, and I'll make some remarks in a few minutes, I don't believe that from a policy standpoint, we can separate the digital billboard ordinance that they adopted and static billboard placements. I think we're talking about, I think they behave the same way from a height, from an area standpoint, from a functionality standpoint, that they're trying to provide off-site messaging. So I think we have to consider them together as one asset, one element. So I think from a policy standpoint, I don't think we should separate the two. I think we should look at static billboards in relation to their digital billboard ordinance, which, as I'll point out in a few minutes, it clearly violates that ordinance.
Okay, so the distance requirement is for digital, not necessarily static?
Correct.
Okay.
That's right. With a planned area development like our structure, you have the opportunity to develop new standards or tailor new standards for the proposal. Okay, this is another exhibit just to make a mental note. So if you look at the northern sign, the items in blue, that's what I put on the slide, but that's 730 feet from the Bell Park neighborhood in Peoria. That's the nearest single-family residential zone. So just to keep a mental note, when I talk about the digital billboard ordinance, they require a minimum of 1,000 feet from single-family residential districts. Clearly, this does not meet that standard.
Ron? Yeah.
The northern side sign is, there were two signs, is there one facing right toward the residents? Back to back, or is it turned facing down toward Bell, the second one? Or?
The northern, Councilor Ames, the northern sign, again, is it's oriented along the Loop 101, but I still think from several angles from the Bell Park neighborhood, this sign would be visible, particularly at 85 feet height.
They're both facing east then?
They would be facing along the 101. There's two sign faces for the northern sign.
Yeah.
So they're trying to advertise to Loop 101 traffic.
Yeah.
The difference between that one and the southern sign is a tri-face sign.
No, and I know that,
Yeah.
but the northern sign, and that's the one that most intrudes on the Peoria housing neighborhoods there.
Correct.
But does one of those face toward them? Does it face west, one of them? Or we don't really know. It's two.
Yeah,
They're both facing,
it's very
on an
conceptual
angle there, I
at this
guess, aren't they?
point, but
is
it's
that little triangle, is that the way they are?
correct. Yeah, you can kind of
So
see the
one
little
is
white
really
triangle.
kind of facing north and the other's facing southeast, I guess. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Mr. Edwards?
I think the point you're trying to make, though, Chris, right, is it doesn't meet their standards.
Correct. That's right.
Whether they're facing north, south, east, or west, it doesn't
Absolutely.
meet their standards.
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about, I know there's a lot of text here, but just briefly about the de-annexation that Carl and John alluded to. So the portion that we de-annexed back in 2007 that's shown in blue here, and that was a 12-acre area. Again, the overall Palm Canyon Business Park is 26 acres in size. So the city of Glendale had approached us back then. They had a developer that was interested in building an office park, a two-story office park, and they wanted to develop wholly in one jurisdiction, in Glendale or in Peoria. And I think when they did their analysis, it made more sense to be in Glendale. So as that proposal came to us, Carl directed our staff to look at it, do an engineering study on it, and consider the feasibility of it being in the city of Peoria, Glendale. And it's got some constraints on it. For one, access could only be given at 83rd Avenue. ADOT was not amenable to having access on Bell Road. So, and that would only be emergency access. And what that precludes from a land use perspective is you would not have high turnover uses. So uses that would be compatible with that would be things like office, which is what they were proposing. When we looked at utility services, it was problematic for us to extend utility services across a river corridor to the east side. It just did not make sense from a provision standpoint or maintenance standpoint. It was unduly expensive. So what we concluded in the end of that engineering study was the site cannot feasibly develop in Peoria. It made sense to develop in Glendale. And this was part of a number of cooperative de-annexations we've done with Glendale over the years, because if you look at our boundary, it follows the section lines, but it jogs in and out of the river corridor. So there are some instances where the city of Glendale is west of the river or east of the river. And so over the years, we've tried to clean up that boundary so that for service delivery perspectives. So when we looked at it, we were certainly in support of the office project that the developer was proposing. It was certainly, as we saw it, the highest and best use. We thought, given its proximity to residential and other uses, it made sense. It was an appropriate land use transition. So we were in support of that proposal. So Glendale at that time, after the de-annexation and annexation, they then processed an entitlement activity, a zoning case with them, which zoned the site to a PAD for only two-story office condos. It was a nice project. The signage allowances was for only localized signage that was permitted at 83rd Avenue. So the standards that they had set in place with the PAD fully supported a low-lying transitional office project. That development did not materialize, but again, with any zoning case, the underlying standards, they remain in place and they continue in time. So when we look at the request, and as you reflect on the letter that I forwarded to Glendale, we're not challenging the notion that Glendale has, once the annexation occurred, they have full zoning authority to consider changes. In fact, that's what they have in front of them today. They have a proposal in front of them today to amend that PAD. Glendale, of course, has full purview to consider that and take action on it. What we're saying is this proposal is incompatible with that de-annexation and our expectation for that site. The billboards, not only are they impactful to neighborhoods, they're visually intrusive, they're out of scale with a transitional office project. Functionally, when you consider what the purpose of a billboard is, it's not to provide signage for on-site uses, it's to provide off-site advertising. So clearly, it's not there to serve the on-site needs of the office project. So obviously, this was not something that the city of Glendale, the city of Peoria contemplated when this application came in. Certainly, if the request had been forwarded to Peoria for an office project and say some billboards along with it, we might not have been inclined to support that de-annexation effort. And I think that's the point in the letter.
At that time, we could have done an intergovernment agreement, though, and allowed them to get sewer from Glendale, right, and still be in Peoria. So there were other ways we could have handled that, but I guess we thought the de-annexation and trading was better at that point. As you know, I was opposed to that at that time.
Oh, Councilor, the de-annexation?
Yeah.
Yeah, from a service delivery, when we look at the sewer service that we had west of the river, it just extending those lines across the river corridor and in the manner in which we would
But we could have done an intergovernment agreement. They could have gotten sewer from Glendale and still been in Peoria if we do those things, right?
There probably could have been a number of things
Right,
that we hadn't contemplated.
But I think we did go ahead with the idea as it's presented here. It would be a pad, it would be a office building.
Correct.
And I think we acted in good faith that way. I don't think we would have voted for it if we would have been told we were going to put up some big signs there, and that's what we're going to see in Peoria. But,
Councilor, I think you're correct in that.
yeah.
So I talked a few minutes ago about how it's inconsistent with the digital billboard ordinance. I talked about how they adopted an ordinance in 2012. It was a great ordinance. We consider it a model. That ordinance restricts new digital billboard placements between Camelback and Northern along the Loop 101. It's what's called their sports and entertainment district. And again, we believe it's a good ordinance. So one of the questions might be, well, this is a static billboard proposal. How can you look at it through the lens of a digital billboard? They're different asset types. And my response would be, again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think from a policy, we have to consider them together. They have the same functional purpose, which is to provide off-site signage. They have the same impact to the site and the surrounding areas in terms of their height, their area, impact to neighborhoods. So I don't think from a policy standpoint we should disengage them from the ordinance. So that's one of the points we made in that letter, is that we should consider them in alignment with the digital billboard ordinance that Glendale passed. So if we look at it through those lens and look at the placement and some of the standards, it doesn't compute. For one, this is not a qualifying site. Again, you have to be south of Northern to be a qualifying site. The height, 85 feet, well beyond what Glendale allows. Glendale allows 60 feet. The spacing doesn't comply, and most importantly, it doesn't meet the residential separation requirements of 1,000 feet. So from a number of different standards, it does not comply with Glendale's digital billboard ordinance. But even if we put that aside and say, okay, let's just put the digital billboard ordinance aside and let's look at it through what does your zoning code say? And the zoning code does have standards on static billboards. And one of the things to mention when we look at our codes and ordinances is they are a tool to implement public policy. So we have to look at it in that perspective. In Glendale, static billboards are only allowed in industrial zones. And again, this is an office district. 85 feet, well beyond the 25 feet that Glendale would allow in their industrial zoning district. The sign area of 672 square feet, well beyond the 300 square feet that they would ever allow. And also they have an interesting provision that a lot of jurisdictions have, and it says that if you put a new static billboard placement, we're going to require a corresponding removal of an existing billboard to the extent that that company has that asset in that city. So they would require that, and again, I don't think we're aware of any accommodation that's been proposed in this perspective here. But I think when we look at the codes and ordinances, I think we have to look at the values at which they implicitly try to advance. And I think when you look at the fact that Glendale only wants static billboards in industrial locations, I think that says something about this as an aging type of technology, the fact that they do not intend or want these types of structures to be in visible locations. Industrial districts are not typically in visible locations. And I think the provision requiring a corresponding removal of the billboard, I think, speaks to the idea to check the proliferation. They don't want to expand the number of static billboard placements in the city. So what I'm saying in the letter is, even if they're not in alignment with the digital billboard ordinance, they're certainly not in alignment with their zoning code with respect to static billboard placements. So what are the next steps, and what is our opposition to the Becker Board? Again, we've heard, we've received overwhelming.
Just a moment.
Sir.
Chris, let me interrupt for just a minute. In order for them to break all of their own rules, they must be looking at quite a bit of revenue from these. Is there a lot of revenue from static billboards to be had?
Councilor Carlott, I'm not sure what the numbers on it, but if you think about, you have one message for a period of time versus the digital where you could have multiple messages. I mean, it still generates revenue, but not to the same extent, of course. But I don't know what the numbers are on that.
What about the value of the land? I mean, you put 2 huge billboards on it, 8 stories high. Does that devalue it for another office park or some other kind of entity coming in anytime in the near future?
Councilor Carlott, that's a very good question. I mean, I would argue that from that it does devalue it from a character perspective. I mean, trying to put a nice office project and then have these 2 huge billboards and have a neighborhood that's not very happy with you. I don't think that's a good position to be in.
Okay, thank you.
So just to summarize the technical letter that we sent, again, we've received overwhelming opposition from neighborhoods both in Glendale and Peoria. We believe there's a quality of life impact in neighborhoods. We believe it would markedly change the character of the future office project. It would circumvent the digital billboard ordinance because it's inconsistent with the standards, violates your zoning ordinance. So what are the next steps? On your council agenda this evening, agenda item 20R, there is a resolution to the extent that the council chooses to act in opposing this case. So that's on the agenda this evening. As John pointed out, the next action in front of the City of Glendale would be at their Planning and Zoning Commission. They had a workshop a couple weeks ago. They did not take any public testimony at the time. December 5th would be an opportunity to take public testimony, and the Planning Commission would make a recommendation. And then the Glendale City Council, we don't know what the final date will be, but it's projected to be early next year sometime.
Last year, when the Glendale PZ talked about it and didn't take public comment, and then they're bringing it back for public comment this time, on the 5th?
On the 5th, they did, at the last work session, they did not take any public comment, with the exception, I think they had a couple questions for Rose Law Group representing Becker Boards. So they took a few questions. They didn't take any general testimony, but the idea at the public hearing would be a full public hearing to take testimony from all parties.
Oh, so that was a work study session?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes. Bill.
Chris, I have a question. What's the normal size of an average billboard?
In terms of area?
Height?
I think the heights vary. Glendale's ordinance is 60 feet. I think when we prepared for our process, when we talked to neighborhoods and tried to take a pulse about billboards in our city, we looked at cities across the valley, and I think they varied from 60 feet. Some are up to 80 feet, but they tended to be around 60 feet. Seemed to be the prevailing standard.
Are the billboards across from Cardinal Stadium, the digital billboards, are those 60 feet?
Some of those are 60 feet. My understanding is some of those are 85 feet in that they predated the digital billboard ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Ray?
The developer that's going in there, I read that they opposed the idea. They don't like the billboards.
Councilor
The
Ames.
office buildings,
Pardon me?
the office buildings that are.
Councilor Ames, the office developer that was going to go in when the project was entitled, they've since moved on, but the zoning stays in place, and as I understand, the property has changed hands a few times, and the current owner of the property has given the right to Becker Boards to pursue this PAD change.
So the current owner's okay with it?
Correct.
The previous one was not. Was that a reason why they left, or no.
I think, well, when the zoning action took place, that was 2007. That was about the time when the economy changed. Okay,
Other questions?
the last slide.
Anything else? Thanks very much. We're adjourned until the regular meeting at 7.